Hi, this is James, and I'm here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting February the 20th, 2017. This week, the reading's going to be done with playing cards, and the deck that I'm using this week is the Hessler's Enhanced Playing Cards. So I have the deck on the table. I'm going to jump right into the reading. I'm going to shuffle the cards. And just as I do with every weekly reading that I do, I'm asking the general question: what do we need to know for the week ahead? So I'm feeling one more time will be good. Now I'm going to cut the deck. And I'm fanning out the cards. And I'm picking 3 from the fan that are getting my attention. So I have the 3 cards chosen, and I'm gathering up the rest of the deck. I'm putting it aside. So when I'm working with playing cards, I tend to read them from left to right. So going with the first card, we have the Jack of Hearts. Okay, so this is a face card. Kings, queens, and jacks represent people, typically. So what I do in the general context, I tend to look at them as approach cards, just like I would when I'm reading court cards or from tarot in these weekly readings. So I tend to look at it from the lens of we're being asked to consider adopting a particular role or approach going through the week. So the Jack of Hearts, hearts is the suit that can represent feelings, emotions, and relationships. So with this particular card, we're being asked to consider what our love walk is this week in terms of how we relate to other people. The Jack of Hearts is the card that can represent either Cupid or it can represent the lover. So again, how can we be more loving in terms of our approaches to people or situations this week? How we enter a situation. I'm a big believer in paying attention to how you show up. So it's about showing up in a sense with more love in our hearts this week towards other people, but also to how can we be more loving to ourselves? Because just like I said last week, I may have said this, I'm pretty sure I did, that we are always having a relationship with ourselves. So sometimes I'm seeing this, sometimes our ability or inability to be loving towards others can sometimes be a mirror or a direct correlation to how willing we are to be loving to ourselves. So I'm seeing all of that. So again, it's about how can we be more loving to ourselves as well as other people this week. The other thing about the Jack of Hearts is that it can represent news or messages. All jacks represent news or messages. So this one could be about news of love or news having to do with relationships or something of that nature. It's like if you're going to be putting messages out there to other people, how can you put those messages out there with a greater sense of love or a greater sense awareness of love, I should say, with that. So I'm seeing that with the energy of the Jack of Hearts. Again, this is about approaching things with more love this week, and so that could be people, that could be circumstances, that could be conditions. How can we bring more love to that? As well as how can we be more loving to ourselves? It's all about having love be the approach this week, or approaching things with a greater sense of love. So I'm seeing that with the Jack of Hearts. So now the next card will inform us more about this particular card. So the middle card is, so here we have the 4 of Hearts. So now we have hearts over hearts, right? I tend to look at this card as influencing the first card. So again, we're looking at things from either an emotional standpoint, a feeling standpoint, or having to do with relationships specifically, right? So the 4 is a number that can represent a couple of things. The 4 first can be a foundation. So it's about laying a foundation. So it could be a particular relationship is just in its foundational stage. So kind of like we're laying the groundwork to build on. I'm seeing that. And with that, it could be a sense of, there may be some work or effort needing to put into the relationship because the 4 is a work card. But not just that, it could be the particular challenge might be is like hard work. You know, sometimes we have the idea of like relationships sometimes should be easy, but sometimes we may have to work at a relationship. You know, you get it to a stage where it may become easier, but maybe if it's a foundation stage, you know, you're laying the groundwork, you may have to put a lot of energy or a lot of effort into making the relationship work, because I'm being shown the word work in quotes, you know. So it's about like, what would you be willing to do in order to do your part, your contribution, doing your work in either a particular relationship or just relationships generally speaking. So I'm seeing that. The other thing here with the four could be about like seeking. I tend to look at jacks as the seekers, you know, seeking a greater sense of emotional security and stability, because the four is also a number of stability and security. And then tied to the hearts, it's about emotional sense of stability and security. So what would you need to do that would allow you to feel a greater sense of emotional stability and security? And so here's what's coming to me in the moment about that. You know, sometimes we may be looking to other people to make us feel secure, to make us feel a sense of stability, and to make us feel comfortable. And so here we're being asked to maybe do a reframe around that, because the four is about framework for me. So I'm seeing a frame. So it's about how can we possibly do a reframe around that and take ownership of making ourselves feel that sense of stability and security. You know, because sometimes when we put that responsibility onto somebody else, we kind of maybe give them the power to make us feel that way. And so if the relationship is working, that can be great. But if it's not, and you're in the midst of having some sort of challenges, then we could turn to blaming and scapegoating and making the other person responsible, because I'm seeing the idea of like pointing the finger and I'm like, you should be making me feel this way, or how come you're not making me feel this? And it's really not about that. You know, the idea here is that feelings, no matter what they're about and no matter what they're in reference to or who's connected to it, you know, we get to choose our feelings. You know, our feelings are a matter of an emotional reaction or response to what's going on around us. But we ultimately get to choose that. So the idea here is about like, you know, maybe someone watching this video needs to hear the idea of like, how can you take ownership and take responsibility of your emotional responses and emotional reactions and not make it the responsibility of somebody else, whether they're doing something that works for you or they're doing something that you feel is working against you, right? So I'm seeing that with the idea of the Four of Hearts. The other thing about the Four of Hearts I want to suggest here, sometimes the four can be a number of limitation or restriction. So there may be a sense of feeling emotionally limited or emotional restriction or confined within an emotional experience or a relationship. So with that, it's about like, again, and that would be a personal power issue. Like, how can you work on reclaiming your sense of personal power that would empower you and enable you to seek the possible freedom or to not have so much restriction in that emotional experience or in that relationship. So I'm seeing that. So now the next thing we can do is we can take the numerical values of the cards and kind of at this point come up with an underlying influence. So the Jack is valued at 11, and then we have a 4. So 11 and 4 is 15. And if we reduce that to a single digit, we have 6. So the 6 is a number that can represent taking responsibility. So kind of nice dovetail on what I just said about like reclaiming personal power and empowering yourself to do something to create change, right? To some degree, something may need to be changed, right? So with that, you're being asked to take some responsibility for that, or as much responsibility as you can. You know, again, when it comes to relationships, there's two different things going on. It's like you have your level of responsibility for the condition of the relationship, right? And then the other person has his or her equal responsibility to that relationship. You know, so there's that. So you have to take a look at what's going on your side of the line and saying, what am I willing to take responsibility for? And taking control of what I can change on my side, right? So I'm seeing that as the energy of the 6, that's one side of it. It's also about like, we may be looking at things in terms of emotional experiences this week and asking ourselves, what am I getting out of this? Because the 6 is a number of, in addition to responsibility, it's also about reward. And so I'm a big believer in, and I think I've said this in previous videos, because I have a psychology background, I learned when I was doing my psychology work that as human beings, we are all motivated by some form of self-interest. So anything that we engage in, we do it with the lens of, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? Right? And so it could be like we're needing to take a look at, or maybe having to ask ourselves the difficult question is, what am I getting out of this? Am I getting a return on the investment of my time and energy into this situation? And if not, would I be willing to change that? And then the last thing with the 6, especially in the lens of relationships, it can represent balancing the needs of other people and the needs of yourself. You know, sometimes the 6 can represent commitments where we engage in becoming overly responsible for the needs of other people at the expense of ourselves. So I'm seeing that all with the 6. Okay? So now moving to the next card. And the next card will inform us more about the middle card. So we have, okay, this makes sense. So we have the 2 of spades, right? So the spades as a suit can represent things like hurdles, challenges, blocks, and can also represent a need to take a look at the decision-making process and how we're going to handle those blocks, those obstacles, those challenges. So I'm seeing that. The 2 is a relationship number, but when it's tied to a spade, because the spade is the most challenging suit in playing cartomancy, right? So with that, the 2 can represent conflict. So it could be saying too, like we're moving through a space where we may be having conflict in our emotional experiences, our emotional situations with other people. So this could be a particular relationship, or it could be just relationships generally speaking. It could also be too, because of that sense of conflict, we may be in a space where we are undecided about something, or that we are butting heads with another person in a particular relationship over something. And so it could be, what would you be willing to do? Remember, I said it's about, like, you know, taking ownership and taking, regaining a sense of personal power. That's what I said. So what would you be willing to do? Again, you can't control what another person's going to think. You can't control what another person's going to say. You can't control what another person's going to do. You only can control what you are going to think, what you are going to say, and what you are going to do. So you may be challenged with that this week, or we may be challenged with that, because these readings are for me as well. So we may be challenged with that this week. It could be like, if we are faced with a decision, this card would show up to say, what further information do we have, or do we need to have, that's going to allow us to make the best possible decision. And it could be a decision for not just yourself, but for another party, because the 2 represents like pairings, it could represent couplings, it could represent a duo. So it could be like there may be you and another person who's involved in this, and that you may have to make a well-informed choice that's going to be in the best and highest good for yourself and for the other person. And that would make sense about what I said about the 6, about making sure that there's a balance of needs met, the needs of other people as well as the needs of yourself. So I'm being reminded of that with this card. But that's the energy of the 2 of spades, especially since it's coming after, coming after a card from the suit of hearts. So we're being asked to take a look at either relationships generally speaking, or a particular relationship in which we are feeling a sense of conflict, and how are we going to move through that conflict? What choices or decisions are we willing to make? You know, I'm seeing the idea of maybe like, what compromises are we willing to make? Because it could be like, the reason for the butting heads could be like, one person is seeing it or wanting it one way, another person is seeing it and wanting it a different way, and maybe the best possible solution is, how can, instead of it being either or, how can we have and or both? You know, and it could be too, like, if there's a debate, if there's a conflict, if there's a disagreement, it could be, maybe the best possible solution would be just being willing to agree to disagree. So if we take the 4 and the 2, numerical values of the last 2 cards, we have 6, and we've already talked about what the 6 is. So we had a 6 at the beginning, and we have the 6 here, again repeating. So the emphasis is here on creating a sense of balance. You know, it could also be too with the 6. The 6 is a number that can represent either someone's home life, because the 6 is a very domesticated number. So it could be like This is actually a home life or a situation that's close to home, right? And it could be, again, having to do with family. 6 is a very family-oriented number, so it could be like either one's personal life or a family-related issue. You know, how can we create a greater sense of balance within that? But also, too, the 6 is a number of healing. You know, and healing can only begin when each person on the side of the issue, whatever side you're on in the issue, is willing to take responsibility for their part and taking responsibility for the change that they can help create. So I'm seeing that. So the last thing we can do here is we can take a look at all 3 cards and come up with a numerical value. So we have 11, we have 4, which is 15. If we add those together, 11 and 4 is 15. And then the 2 is 17. 17 reduces to 8. And it brings it all back. Again, the 8 is a number of personal power. So the whole theme of this week is about how can we create a greater sense of personal power, again, through the lens of taking responsibility. That is one way you become more powerful, is by taking responsibility and not making it the responsibility or assigning blame or fault to other parties involved. So again, it's about how can we create a greater sense of personal power and control in our lives this week, but through the lens of our feelings, because the hearts represent feelings, and the spades represents our intellect, our thoughts. So this whole idea about personal power this week is going to be an internal process. You know, we're going to be looking at our thoughts and our feelings in particular this week. It may be coming in the form of an external relationship or an external situation, but it's about looking at our reactions to it in terms of our thoughts and our feelings. So on that note, I will end and wrap up this week's Oracle Outlook. I am James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a wonderful week. Take care.